So today I was going to the monastery. This is the Jamyang monastery in Kennington. And a lot of students will turn around and say, when I do the meditation and the instruction is given for inverting the attention onto oneself, how does one disassociate from thought and simply understand what the attention is on myself, right? Because when doing meditation, we don't, or we shouldn't, in fact, distort from the attention. But if the attention's on oneself, how do we comprehend what the attention actually is in oneself, right? And it got me thinking. Within Buddhism, there's something called the Heart Sutra. Now, the way I like to think about the inverted attention is via the Heart Sutra. The Heart Sutra says that form is emptiness and emptiness is form. Now, if a human has a form, right, because we call ourselves human, right, it means that we are capable of not having a form, which means that we are the spirit, the embodiment of oneself. So when we are inverting the attention, it can be quite daunting to try and reflect on what someone is or what we perceive ourselves to be. But this is the very nature and the trick to the question. It's our perception of what we think we are. It is not the reality of what we are. It is our perception, which is merely the thought of what we think we are, but not what we can be. So when I explain to students what this actually means, I like to think of it as this little jar which I have on the floor. See? You can take a jar, right? And it comes to that very, very famous interview question of, well, is the jar half full or is the jar half empty? Well, if you look at it from one perspective, a student will say, well, the jar is full if you look at it from, down here. But if you look up here, oh, the jar is empty, right? Half empty. So I propose this solution. What if you just look at the jar in front of you, like this? What is the jar now? Is the jar half full or half empty? But you may say, well, I've already answered the question because I've looked at it from different points of view. Correct, you have. But you haven't looked at it from the single pane which is in front of you. So, the question is not, is the glass half full or half empty? It's, well, first of all, the answer is it's neither, it's both. But the question is this really a jar? Because if we think about it, we've only ascertained this to be a jar based upon its parameters, right? Like, it sounds like glass. It, sounds like it's water inside. There's, this metal attachment at the top. But these are all things which are given to us. This is what we perceive based upon the pattern of what we see on the glass, which means that is our thought based upon our perception of vision. Which means that this glass, or what we call glass, doesn't actually exist. Yeah? It is just merely the interpretation of the neurons in our brain. So what does that mean in terms of emptiness as form and form as emptiness? It means that when we invert the attention on ourselves, we are not actually engaging in anything. We are not looking at the world and with conscious thought associating with it from our perception of what we understand. Because there's nothing to understand. We are merely in the presence of the object in which we see. Right? In other words, we are looking at something without any thought or any motion or any grandeur as to what exactly the object of attention is. Because remember, it's an object, and if you think about programming, the way an object is defined in programming is through definition of categories, right? So take the glass, the jar, for example, right? It's defined by what we perceive to be our reality, right? If you have a baby comes out of the womb, that baby, if I show the jar again, will not have any preconceived notion as to what this is. Okay? So how do we apply that to oneself? When we look at oneself, the idea is that we are neither the water inside the jar, or the air inside the jar, or the jar itself. We are all of these elements combined and more. Because we are the form of the jar, but we are also the emptiness inside of it. We are also the water and the structure of the jar, but everything around it as well. And this is the key, I think, in terms of the meditation of the inversion of the attention onto ourselves, right? In which we need to understand ourselves not as an object of physical being, but as an object which is uniquely us in the present. In other words, our very consciousness, which cannot be defined, and its environment in tune at the same time. And I think that is the key, essentially, when doing meditation and inverting on ourselves, is to not have any preconceived notions of ourselves, but to simply understand that we are within and part of our surroundings. So without judgment, we are judging ourselves. I know it sounds very, very funny and very, very contradictory, but I think that's the way to look at it, right? Because in other temple practices, in other monasteric practices, we can say, right, okay, focus on a candle which is lit. But have you ever noticed when you focus on the candle, you are only focusing on the candle which is lit in front of you, and you're doing everything that you can just to look at the candle. But everything which is around you is not within your periphery. In other words, everything that is within your existence frame of reference, your existential frame of reference, is only that of the candle. Everything else doesn't exist until you look at it, right? Something can't exist if you don't look at it. You don't know what's happening in another country if you're not there. You can only see what's in front of you within your periphery. Everything else is relative, because it's all systemic processing which happens in our brain, right? It is conscious thought. It is literally what we perceive the world to be. And that goes into things like manifestation, right? The manifestation can be a projection of our frame of reference within the world, which kind of leads us on to the illusion of Maya within Buddhism, to say that, our fears, our love, our feelings, our thoughts, our patterns are all relative because they don't actually exist, besides neurochemical thoughts and interpretation of what we perceive it to be. So if you're in meditation and you're doing, these kind of practices, I hope that this has helped to try and shed some clarity and understanding as to what is meant by that particular instruction when you're meditating in, a Buddhist school, for example. Perhaps even in Hindu or other types of meditation as well. So I'm not sure if that gives you clarity. If it does, I'm happy for you. If not, let's discuss it in the comment section and let's see if we can get a resolution to the answer. Appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching. Good night, good morning, and goodbye.